Hey, thank you for listening to Talking Guns with Joe. I am Joe, and tonight I am joined by Tim Harvey. Attorney Tim Harvey.
Tim Harvey's fine. Attorney Tim Harvey costs more.
Okay, I'm not paying you nothing because I am broke. Tonight we're going to really talk about this law that was back in March. They put it in effect. The Florida...
the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Safety Act.
That's why you're an attorney. I can't remember these things. The big thing with us, and a lot of the questions we're still getting, we're just going to jump right into this, is about this banning starting October 1st of this year, 2018, of the bump stocks.
Yeah, I'm a little bit leery to see this as something good. If they were just to come out and say we're going to ban a bump stock, that's not bad. We all know what a bump stock is.
Let's tell people that don't know what a bump stock is. Some people don't know out there. Basically, it's an item you replace a stock on your rifle, AR-15 style rifle. You replace this stock, and it's a weird-looking thing. You kind of hook your finger. The stock goes up to where your trigger guard is. You kind of hook your finger in there, and instead of actually pressing the trigger, you push the gun forward with your support hand, and then the trigger is basically bouncing off your finger.
Right, and the bump stock causes the trigger to release and reset without you having to, put a finger input into it. Causes it to mimic, some people say mimic automatic fire. If you're well practiced with it, it does, but you lose a lot of accuracy.
I call it a gimmick, and I upset people with that.
I would agree with you.
To me, it was a gimmick item. You bought it for your gun, novelty. You put it on there. We at the gun shop, we sold a few of them, I think 4 or 5 in 6 years. We were never big into those things, and they had a special order. It's nothing we would stock. And I think it was 5 of them. And 4 people came back and had them they went to the range one time, and they came back in and had us take it off their rifle for them. Not now. As of October 1st.
Right, as of October 1st, possession of a bump stock, sale of a bump stock,
anything with this bump stock,
transfer of a bump stock, any of those become illegal. You can't, there's no grandfathered clause. You don't get to keep yours. Possession October 1st, you own one. They find, the law enforcement finds you with one. You are committing a felony.
Yeah, 3rd degree felony. So that means if you get caught with one, you're no longer owning guns.
Not just caught, convicted.
Yes.
But 1 to 5 years in prison, up to a $5,000 fine.
Ooh, not for me.
No, not for me either.
Do not own one, so I don't have an issue there. But it's not like it was a registered item anyway. It's not like they're going to be, hey, Joe bought a bump stock back in 2012. He probably still has it at his house. We're going to go search and check.
True, and there's no list or registry of bump stocks, and I doubt very highly there will be some sort of a door-to-door search for bump stocks. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe. I don't think that would ever happen. However, if you happen to forget about it, you go to a local range one day, whatever, and law enforcement finds out about it.
Just mere possession of it. Doesn't even have to be on your firearm. Mere possession of it is a felony.
Do you really think this is going to go through?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't feel that this law, as it's written, is going to survive a constitutional challenge. There are a number of reasons. I won't get into the specific legal process, but one of the problems with it is that you have to create a law that people know they're breaking. And if it was just bump stocks, we would say, okay, I own a bump stock, I can't have one, and therefore I'm okay. I know I'm breaking the law, it's on me. The problem is that the legislature in Florida didn't just ban bump stocks or bump fire stocks, which is another brand of the bump style stocks. They expanded the definition to cover so many things that I've talked to retailers, I've talked to gun owners. We don't know what actually falls into the banned category now.
No, it's confusing.
Horribly. The title that they've come up with is a conversion kit, a tool, an accessory, or a device used to alter the rate of fire of a firearm to mimic automatic weapon fire, or which is used to increase the rate of fire to faster than is possible for a person to fire the semi-automatic firearm unassisted. Well,
that sounds like an attorney wrote that.
yeah, well,
Sorry.
Sadly, one probably did, and the way that attorneys break this down, we look at each individual little element of this, and it's obvious that bump stocks, because they name bump stocks, are banned. But what else could fall into that category?
Do you know how many other states have banned them so far? I know there's a couple other ones.
I don't know off the top of my head, but in reporting, I do know of only one crime at this point that's, one mass shooting that's involved a bump stock, and that was the Las Vegas shooting.
And are we guaranteed to use that?
No. That's the full report is not. Yeah, the full report has not been released, but that's the information that came out.
So it wasn't used in Florida. It wasn't used at the Parkland incident.
Wasn't used at Parkland. Wasn't used in Orlando, Santa Fe. Wasn't used at the Pulse nightclub. It's bump stock is, again, I don't have a problem with the ban if it were limited to the product known as a bump stock, but anything that you install on your firearm that increases the rate of fire, and understand that the law wasn't written by gun owners or by gun users. Correct. The law was written by people responding to like-minded individuals who want to ban.
It was a knee-jerk reaction.
It sure was.
And 24 hours they had this thing done.
And the problem is that broad basis, that broad thing, that broad category that they, or definition that they created, can involve a number of things. If I, for our AR-15 users out there, or people who are like me that like to tinker with my guns, I can put a short reset trigger in. And what that functionally does is shorten the distance I have to release the trigger before it resets so I can pull the trigger again. Full, keeps it semi-automatic. I almost said fully semi-automatic. Can't help that. Those of you who get the joke will get the joke.
Yes.
But it's semi-automatic, but it physically shortens the distance I have to move my finger to fire another round.
Yes.
That would potentially make it possible to fire that firearm faster than it was manufactured with the original stock mil-spec trigger.
But does it always say original? So it has to be the way it came out of the factory?
The way it says is faster than they would normally be able to fire that semi-automatic firearm. It does not say.
Because, you look at your basic Smith & Wesson M&P AR-15.
Yeah, the M&P-15.
Or some of the less expensive ones that are out there on the market. Then you jump up into your Daniels Defense, your LWRCs. They all come with nicer and better triggers.
Right.
So is that still going to be deemed normal? Or are they going to go back to the standard Bushmaster or Colt that was issued in the military?
And you said you couldn't be a lawyer. That's the problem. Is that this definition?
Maybe.
Yeah, this definition is so broad that how are you as a retailer supposed to know that what I've ordered is going to violate the rules? How am I as a purchaser supposed to know that what I buy off the shelf at a retailer, whether it violates this rule or not? This rule is so broad that there's no way you can know whether or not you're violating it. Short of, I bought a bump stock and put it on my gun.
And
that's
we need
easy.
to know as retailers, and that's an awesome point, because folks, we're recording at a gun shop if you can't see behind us. And by the way, you can watch us if you go on our Facebook page. It's Talking Guns with Joe, or our YouTube channel at the same name. You can actually watch Tim and I will wave. We're waving. But we're sitting here in the gun shop recording a show, and we're looking at triggers for ARs that, like you said, they're 3.5 pounds of short reset triggers. We have a bunch of them here. So am I going to be a felon for selling them to somebody?
Potentially, yes. And until somebody gets arrested, charged, convicted of this process, where it has to go through an appeals process where the constitutionality of the law as written is tested, then we're not going to be able to get it reversed.
So we got to find a victim first.
Sadly, I don't want to be that first person.
I don't want to be that first person.
I wouldn't mind being on the team that represented that first person, because I have very strong feelings about this. Listen, bottom line, I don't want to see anybody killed by a person using a firearm improperly, period. No. Before I was an attorney, I was a law enforcement officer. I've worked
we have
shootings.
something in common there.
Yeah, I've worked shootings. I've worked stabbings. When people want to be violent, they'll find a way to be violent. Doesn't necessarily mean a gun. I understand why this law was passed, but it's left some pretty gaping holes to be driven through in court, and some things that we need to get better definitions of.
And everything else under this law that they passed, wasn't March, whatever, 18th, whatever day that was, everything took effect immediately except this section.
Right. March 9th was when the background checks were changed, the rules about background checks and 3-day waits were changed. They did a good job. I understand, and I don't disagree with background checks. Again, I've been a gun owner for 20 plus years.
You're telling us your age now.
Yeah. We won't talk.
We won't go there.
But, I've been a gun owner for years. I like owning my guns, but I don't mind waiting. I've never really felt myself needing that. I want to buy one right now. It's nice to be able to.
Me, I got that instant gratification in me. When I buy it, I want to take it home that day. And that's why I got my concealed weapons license too, and I know you do as well. You could take it home that day.
That's true.
The only people affected by that whole thing are people that do not have their Florida concealed weapons license. Then the people, 18-year-olds can no longer buy them. You have to be 21.
Right. They raised the purchase age for long guns to 21. It used to be 18. It was always 21 for handguns, but now they've bumped that up for long guns. And the only exception to that is if you're actively in the military. If you're actively in the military, you don't have
law enforcement.
Or law enforcement for the long gun only.
So listen, when we return, we're going to continue this conversation, and we'll be back in a brief second. Welcome back to Talking Guns with Joe. I am Joe, and again tonight we are joined by Attorney Tim Harvey.
Glad to be here, Joe.
Tim, I got one question I forgot to ask you in the first segment. What's your everyday carry firearm?
My everyday carry firearm is a Glock 43.
Yeah, we got
with
something in
night
common
sights.
again there.
It's easy. It goes right into a fat roll, so I don't have to worry about a holster.
We are both pretty
fluffy.
Fluffy. Fluffy's in. The dad bod is in right now. That's
excellent.
So we're doing good. Go back onto the bump stocks here and the rate of fire. I'm just going to let you jump right back in.
Not a problem. We were talking about short reset triggers and how that would technically violate the rule. One of the other popular triggers out there, and understand people, I used to also work in gun retail. So I've dealt with, installing triggers for people and, questions. One of the most popular, type of triggers out there is called a binary trigger. This system is still a
well, let's explain what a binary trigger is.
That's
first.
What I'm going to get into.
I thought you were going to do the attorney.
Nah, I'm not going to get there.
Okay.
Not yet. A binary trigger is simply any type of a trigger setup that when you pull the trigger, it fires a round. When you release the trigger, it fires a round. In doing so, each physical movement of the finger, results in a round being fired. So it's not an automatic weapon. The higher end ones, you can actually put pull the trigger, put the safety on, and it doesn't fire the second round.
That's a good point, because I remember when the first ones came out, we refused to work on them.
They were dangerous. They were.
Oh yeah, because you'd press the trigger, and then let's say you're at the range or something like that, and they scream ceasefire, or something happens. Well, you had to hold your finger on the trigger. You couldn't release it, because if you released it, it was going to fire again.
Yep, you had to drop the magazine with your finger still on the trigger and then operate the bolt to remove the round.
And we had a gunsmith, even though he was lucky he was in the range when he did it, he didn't realize what was going to happen with this thing, and it went off.
From the outside of the gun, it looks just like every other trigger.
Yes.
So
I'm not a huge fan of those. Now, I know the new ones that come out there, I'm not going to say their name brands. Like you said, they're great, because if you press it and you have to hit the safety, you can click it real quick.
Yep, it stops and allows you. But these triggers, if they fire 2 rounds for every one that would normally happen in a standard mil-spec trigger, you're going to double the rate of fire.
And that's
and that would definitely violate this definition in this new law, banning bump stocks. So I'm a little concerned about that, but we get into what rate of fire are we actually talking about? Because they say increase the rate of fire. Okay, well, what rate of fire? Yeah. Is it what they call the cyclical rate? That's a engineered, designed rate of fire. It is how fast a gun could possibly fire if every single thing worked perfectly and you had unlimited ammo to fire it. You take the AR-15, depending on how it's manufactured, you could have a reasonable cyclical rate, and I'm using air quotes when you watch the video, cyclical rate of around 600 rounds per minute. Well, a lot of things have to happen correctly for that to actually happen. You have to have an ammo supply of at least 600 rounds.
And your average magazine's 30 rounds, so you're doing a lot of changing.
Yeah, and that's going to slow down your cyclical rate also.
Yeah,
and you have to have a barrel that's not going to melt away after 600 rounds of fully automatic fire. So cyclical rate, again, is an engineered rating. It's like saying that, an engineer sat down and said, if everything moves in the right place, this bolt can go back and forth 600 times in a minute, meaning we can fire 600 rounds. If that's the rate of fire, then none of these things are going to ban. If that's what we're using for our benchmark of firing faster, then nothing's going to do that.
So where are they getting this benchmark from?
We don't know. And that's, again, part of the problem. Is it the, and this is a legal fiction, it's called the reasonable man standard. What a reasonable man or a reasonable person would do.
In Jersey, that was a big thing.
Yeah, we've never met the reasonable man.
No.
I don't know who would qualify. Well, and by your definition, you are.
I am reasonable.
So am I. But is that an accepted overall definition? Not really. But,
they can't test me, can they?
Well, that's a good question. If you were being charged with a crime and they wanted you to perform this action for this testing, there are some parallels in other crimes, but there would be issues I'd want to raise about whether or not that is there's a Fifth Amendment issue, a constitutional issue. Now, we have seen this used in DUI sobriety tests. You are required to submit to DUI sobriety tests, or you administratively lose your license.
Well, driving is a privilege.
Driving is a privilege. This is a right issue. And can you be compelled to take an action which would then be used against you in a court of law? You can't be compelled to speak, but that would have to be,
that's going to be tricky.
Yeah, it's going to be bounced around. I mean, there are some precedents about speech. If I robbed a bank and had a mask on and I said, "Give me all your money," well, I can compel you to read "Give me all your money" in a voice lineup.
Yeah,
we can compel you. So I'm not sure whether that parallel. I could argue both sides. Of course, every lawyer out there is laughing because you can argue both sides. But if that's the case, if this is an average person standard, how old's the average person? Is there going to be a standard that's established for the state saying if you put a benchmark per se, you put this trigger in and you can physically fire more than 50 rounds in a minute, then it's beyond the standard. Again, we don't know. And if I am going to come in here and say you can't have this because you, being a young person with good reflexes and quick finger skills because you text all day and play video games, can pull this trigger faster than I can, does that make your gun illegal and my gun not?
That's a good question.
Because then how do we enforce this? Do we, okay, come over here and fire these 10 rounds. Well, okay, if I'm thinking I'm going to charge you as a criminal, I'm going back to the law enforcement officer thing. I'm going to give you 10 bullets to fire and measure those. Wait a minute, I just gave you a loaded gun. Cops are not fond of giving people they're going to arrest loaded firearms.
I can see that.
So who's going to do the testing? How's it going to be done? Who's going to pay for the 10 rounds? Am I going to be forced to pay for the 10 rounds that are going to be used to say I'm exceeding this rate of fire?
Yeah, this is a question everybody's been asking. There's no answer to it.
And there aren't currently answers. And that's the problem with enforcing this kind of a brand new law, because there are no rules set out yet. I would love to see some objective testing done by a non-partisan, non-involved party, a testing lab that can say rate of fire, normal person 35 to 40 is this, 25 to 30 is this, and do some testing where you have 500 people come in, pull the trigger on the same gun,
as fast as they can, and start working out averages. It's still crazy.
It's horribly crazy.
Now, here's another question we always get. I know I'm going to bounce around here a little bit because that's what I do. People have been asking if they keep saying the government, law enforcement can come into your local gun shop and demand the records of all the people who purchased.
No. Law enforcement can't come in and demand records from people from the private businesses without probable cause and either a subpoena or a warrant. There are some reporting requirements that the gun stores are required to perform. One of the myths I've heard many times is that when you fill out the federal 4473 form, that goes to ATF, and ATF knows everything.
That's the form, folks, that you fill out when you go to purchase a gun. There's a couple pages that ask you those funny questions.
Have you ever been a felon, or are you currently a felon?
Why do they do that? You give people the best answer on that.
It's a trick question. If you are not a felon and you answer that question and answer the question, no, I'm not a felon, perfectly okay, we're going to sell you a gun, no problem. If you are a felon and you answer that question, no, I'm not a felon, well, when you sign the form, you have just committed a whole completely separate federal felony by signing that form and lying on it. If you are a felon and you answer truthfully and say, I'm not a felon, we're not going to sell you a gun. That's right. It's kind of a trick question.
And the system, when we run the NICS check, it comes back. It's going to tell us if you're a felon or not. It's better.
Yeah, it doesn't tell us specifics. It'll say whether you passed it, whether you didn't, or whether it's delayed because they want to look into it further. That was one of the changes that happened March 9th. Prior to March 9th of this year, if you had a delayed response from the background check, if they needed more time to look into something, they had 3 business days for which to do that. At 5 o'clock on the third business day, we were able to, as a gun dealer, release that firearm to you, whether they came out with a decision or not. And sometimes 6 months, 7 months later, you get a call from FDLE updating the status on that particular firearm. Most of the times it was approved. Occasionally it wasn't, and they had to send agents out to recover the firearm that we released. But that was legal prior to March 9th. Now, it'll stay. We can't release the gun until the results come back. So it could be 7 months before someone gets their firearm.
I understand why they're doing that. Yes, you have to do the background. Again, we both come prior law enforcement. We don't want the bad guys having the guns on the street. So,
yep. And continuing back to your can they get records thing. Once we finish that federal form we talked about, it doesn't go to ATF. It doesn't go to the state, doesn't go to anyone. It stays in the physical possession of the gun store. If your gun at some point is used in a crime, ATF gets notified by the local agency, who then notifies ATF to do a trace, what they call a trace. They take the manufacturer and serial number, call the manufacturer, say, who did you sell this gun to? Because they manufactured it. They have the first record. And then they'll go to the distributor who they sold that gun to. The distributor will go to the gun store, and only then do they contact the gun store and say, who did you sell this gun to? And until then, there is no federal record of gun ownership.
We've had it happen a couple times.
And it's
not a lot. I mean, it's bound to happen.
It is. And very often, some of the things we've had is somebody's gun was stolen, and they didn't know about it. They had, their gun was stolen, used in a crime, and the same evening it was stolen, recovered by law enforcement, and before the person even knew their gun was gone, they're getting a knock on the door going, hey, where was your gun?
Yes. And you also got to watch, and I've talked about it a few times, I know I upset people with it with the private sales. When you go to sell a firearm to somebody, be careful. Maybe we can talk about that at the end if we have time.
I think that would be an excellent idea.
Because people got to cover the rear ends on that, CYOA. Cover your own assets.
I like it.
Listen, when we return, we're going to finish this conversation. We'll be back in a second. Hey, welcome back. You're listening to Talking Guns with Joe. I am Joe. Again, I have attorney Tim Harvey here with me, and we've been talking about this bump stock ban, as well as any item or accessory device, whatever you want to call it, that alters the rate of fire on your firearm.
Yeah, it's a broad definition, and there's so much in it that currently hasn't been defined. We've had this problem before with laws when they first, when I would say about 2001, they had some changes to the concealed carry laws in Florida, where they talked about something being securely encased.
Yeah.
Now there's a definition in the statute of what securely encased means. When it first came out, totally up to interpretation.
Do they still have the leather strapped holster in there?
It says a holster with a snap.
Okay.
It does not necessarily say it has to be leather, but there were times that individual jurisdictions did that. A question was submitted to the Florida Attorney General, and the Florida Attorney General pretty much said, this is what we believe the securely encased means. That was later codified by, and that means put into the record and voted on by the legislature to make that part of the statute so that the definition was there so we didn't have to guess what it was anymore.
So let's get this out of the way, too. If somebody needs to get a hold of you, you need a good attorney. How do they get a hold of you?
They can call me at my office, 941-809-3615. They can go to my webpage, tharveylaw.com, or tim@tharveylaw.com.
And we'll put all the links below. Go to our Facebook page. Again, it's going to be Talking Guns with Joe, or YouTube channel, Twitter, all the social media outlets. We'll have all Tim's contact information in there for you. But let's go. The bump stock ban. It goes much further than the bump stocks, and it doesn't mean just rifles.
No, it can be on any firearm.
So your handgun, I know you don't have it on your Glock that you're carrying. I don't have it on mine. But if you have a Glock, whatever, you have any kind of handgun, you alter the trigger. You put a new aftermarket trigger in there.
Potentially that falls into that same category because that's any tool or accessory. If I put this accessory on there that allows it, is the tool, do they classify parts in that category? I have a pistol that has a short reset trigger in it. I took it from the stock trigger to a factory short reset trigger, and now it's shorter. Brings up another good point. If it's anything that alters the rate of fire to mimic, fully automatic, if it doesn't mimic fully automatic, it should be excluded. But that's not the way they've worded it. Secondly, if it's anything that makes it go faster than it was manufactured to go, what if I buy a firearm manufactured from the manufacturer with a binary trigger in it? It's designed from the factory to go at that speed, then I'm not doing anything to increase that. Is that legal? We don't know.
Now, a lot of gun shops in the area, as well as Aegis Tactical and everything here in Lakewood Ranch, manufacturers as well.
Right.
You have a manufacturer's license. So let's say I bring a gun in, a Glock 19, whatever it's going to be, any handgun. We trick it out, whatever you want to call it. We modify the gun. We remanufacture it and put a different trigger in there.
Well, it would be as manufactured. That would be the way it was designed by you, a licensed manufacturer.
So then it would be possibly the way they have this sounding legal.
Possibly.
But if you come in as Tim Attorney and buy that item, that trigger kit, the springs and all that stuff, and install it yourself, which I know you're capable of doing.
Potentially, I could be breaking the law. And we're right back to where I started at the very beginning. If you don't know you're breaking a law, how can you be held responsible for that law? In law school, we had a joke, we'd pass it around in class. It was a sheet of paper. It said, reading this sheet of paper is a violation of the law. Well, how would you know until you read this sheet of paper? And that would not be valid.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I mean, even if somebody traveled into the state, they came in here on vacation and go hunting or whatever, because you can bring your gun down here. FOPA, Firearms Owners Protection Act. Yep. But the bump stock's not deemed a firearm.
Right. And it's not regulated by the ATF.
Yes.
But the state chose to regulate it. Again, bump stock itself, I don't have a problem with the state doing that. I don't think it's going to achieve the reduction in crime that is associated with why they passed this bill, because it hasn't been used in crimes in Florida. And
Vegas
we're not positive.
The only one that we know of.
The only one that potentially was. And I believe it probably was at some point used. Probably. But I don't have any proof of that. We will eventually get that.
And you fired them before, right?
I've fired them before. I'm not a fan.
The most inaccurate thing to put on your rifle.
I talk about it all the time. I tell people I want you to own firearms. If you want to own one, you should have any one you can buy. I have no problem with that. But I want you to be responsible with your firearm.
Oh, yeah.
The attorney side of me jumps out and says, every bullet you fire, you're legally responsible for. And if the process of firing a bump stock puts you right on the edge of controllability, there is such a potential for you not to be able to control where those bullets go that I think it's irresponsible to use one. That's my personal opinion, but I think it's
and you're a firearms instructor too, right?
I am a firearms instructor.
You're certified by the NRA and the state of Florida?
Just the state of Florida, not the NRA. Okay. In Florida, you're not required to be an NRA instructor to be a law enforcement instructor. And I have spent many years training law enforcement officers to shoot and have taught other law enforcement officers to be law enforcement instructors. it's all about responsibility. You own every round that comes out of that gun.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would like to talk further about that in the next segment, because some of this new ammo that's coming out is, you just rolled your eyes. It drives me crazy, some of the ammo out there, and people are carrying it. So again, if you go to a local gun shop that's deemed a manufacturer, there's a lot in the area. They put this gun together for you. It might be deemed okay. You can have it.
It might be deemed okay. Again, are we talking about comparing it to the original designs of the Armalite rifle, the AR? Or are we talking, or we want to go back farther? Are we going to talk about Stoner's rifle and say, hey, this is how fast that could fire, so it can't be any faster than this? We don't know. We don't know where to set the benchmark. We don't know what they're going to use to set the benchmark, or what potentially could be, you could be facing in trial. If you were arrested with this, with a modified trigger or a short reset trigger, you don't know what you're going to face.
So some poor person out there, I mean, poor for just their luck, is going to be the first victim.
Yes. And I have a scenario in my head on how I think that's going to happen. Somebody's going to either commit a crime or defend themselves from someone who's trying to commit a violent crime against them using a firearm that has one of these triggers.
Yes.
Or a bump stock. Bump stock will be easy. If they have a bump stock on it and they used it to commit a crime, well, that's going to be pretty easy to prosecute. There aren't going to be a lot of
charges.
we aren't going to be dealing with a lot of these questions. But if someone has a binary trigger and someone comes in their house and they use their firearm to defend themselves, even if you are lawfully allowed to use that firearm to defend yourself and there is no issue about justification, they're going to test your firearm. And if they find you have this, and an enterprising new officer believes that it in fact violates the law, they're going to file charges on you for that.
How about somebody just broke into your house? The cops show up, the criminal's still in the house, and they find these guns that he's trying to steal.
And they realize that one of them has a item which could qualify under this very broad definition. They could charge you. You could be the victim of the crime, have nothing to do with your firearm, and actually go to jail for that.
If I had one, I'd just get rid of it at this point in time.
Definitely for bump stocks. I don't think they're, whatever you paid for them, the investment is probably depreciated.
Yes, it's not worth anything.
Not worth anything.
Friends or family outside the state, mail it to them, have them hold on to it.
And if you, in fact, have a bump stock and you want to keep owning your firearms and don't want to be charged with a felony, I would get rid of one. As for these other things, until we have a better idea of what qualifies.
And the triggers are not going to see it anyway. It's not like it's,
no.
Unless you have one of the fancy colored ones and all that, of course. But that can just be the trigger shoe or parts of it. They're going to have to test the gun.
They're going to have to test the gun.
Compare it to the original stock one.
They would have to have justification to seize it and then test it. Like I said, this is where the scenario I see in my head is it's used in a crime, or they come across it during an investigation in a crime, because then they can seize it.
Yes, because if you use it to defend yourself, no matter what happens, they're going to confiscate your gun.
And run it and test it, and, if you have, this goes for all firearms. If you've done nothing wrong and they find out that you're justified, I've heard the myth that they destroy your firearm if you used it to kill somebody. That's a myth. It's your property. You have the right to get it back. But as you go through and they go through this testing and they find that you have something that violates the letter of this law. It's nothing personal. They're not going after you because you're a gun owner. They check boxes as they're going through everything, and they realize that this violates the law. They're going to have to file charges. You may not physically be arrested. They may just send the charges to the state attorney's office, which is how it works in Florida, and the state attorney decides whether they're going to charge you or not. And there will be some that think that this needs to be charged.
Yep, you'll have somebody that's overzealous and wants to make a name for themselves, and they might be a gun grabber.
They might be, and at some point, that's going to have to be defended. I hate to say it. I don't want to be that poor sucker who happens to be on the wrong end of that arrest. But if they did nothing wrong and they just by virtue of owning this thing are being charged, at some point we have to have that case. So that we can get this drilled down to what the actual answer is, so people will know. So retailers will know. So purchasers will know. So owners will know.
I think the retailers out there need to know if they're going to start carrying the binary triggers, which we can now, or just any aftermarket trigger that's going to potentially violate this law. I don't want to have it in my store now.
No, because that's I don't do a lot of firearms licensure, but I'm guessing if you are convicted as a felon for possessing this, you probably can't run a gun store anymore.
No, there goes my career. I've always wanted to sell ice cream, though, because I know how to eat ice cream really well.
What was the number of that trucking school?
I'll look it up real quick. Listen, we're going to finish this conversation. I want to talk about some ammo that's out there. I want to get your point of view on that and talk again about the private sale, especially what's came out with the divisional licensing recently with the failure to check backgrounds of people with a concealed weapons license. We'll be back in a brief minute, and we'll talk to you then. Hey, welcome back to Talking Guns with Joe. I am Joe, and again, I am joined by Attorney Tim Harvey here. Again, if you missed any segment of the show, you can go right on our Facebook page at Talking Guns with Joe, or our YouTube channel, and you can actually watch the show. You can see how good looking we actually are. I know we sound incredible.
Yeah, I'm awesome.
Better. Yes. Right now, I want to ask you a couple questions, legal questions. We're both firearms instructors. We both teach classes, or taught classes. One of the big things I teach in class is about ammunition and the proper selection. And what to carry, what not to carry, because let's face it, if you press the trigger on your firearm, you said it earlier, you're responsible for that bullet.
Absolutely. You own everything that comes out of that gun.
The last thing I can ever imagine, I couldn't live with myself if I missed my target, or it went through my target and I hit or killed an innocent person.
Yeah, I think that is probably the biggest fear I had as a law enforcement officer.
And it's happened.
I practice regularly. There were many of the people I worked with who didn't. And even practicing regularly under stress, making that snapshot.
You're moving targets.
Always terrified me that an innocent would be harmed.
Yeah. Even if you weren't held responsible for it, you weren't criminally charged, civilly, nobody came after you, whatever it's going to be, you still have to live with that.
Yeah, that's the guy I don't want to have to look at in the mirror every morning.
No. But right now I'm seeing all these people that come into the shop. I call it gimmick ammo with these, they call them super penetrators. They'll take a standard 9mm round that usually travels at 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 feet per second. And now they got 3,000 feet per second.
Wow, that's
fast.
That's fast. And, bullets are a function of physics. When you talk about, impact, that's the weight of the bullet multiplied. The force is mass times acceleration. So we have a bullet moving 3,000 feet per second when it's normally moving 12 or twice the impact.
Yes.
With that comes penetration. And a lot of people are plugging that as being really important.
No.
In my prior life, as a law enforcement officer, and a law enforcement instructor, I was responsible for ordering ammo for the department and ordering ammo for the academy. And we didn't care about penetration. We're shooting two-dimensional paper people.
Yes.
But
that's a target.
But your duty, target. Sorry. But your duty ammo, we used very specific ammo. We didn't want to get too much into off-brand ammos at all because, we had to defend our actions, for every shoot in at least front of the investigators. If you have a round that over-penetrates, goes through the bad guy, you hit the bad guy, good for you. Goes through the bad guy and hits a kid behind the bad guy, you are responsible for that too, and that's a horrible thought.
Yes. I mean, for myself, we talked about this off air for briefly about looking to see what your local law enforcement officers are carrying. Which guns, what brand guns. Ask them what kind of ammo they carry.
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's easy. Get the FBI ballistics report. They run an awesome report. I think it's still available on Amazon. I think I bought it one time.
Yeah, you can definitely get that.
But they just chose Hornady, their critical duty ammo, and their carry. FTX, whatever they call it.
Yeah, and they ran it through a number of tests, and they use standardized testing. The thing I've seen, I like to read about guns and I like to read about ammo, and as a firearms instructor, I like to be on top of this stuff. you see all this, well, tested to do this and tested to do that. Okay, tested by who? Yes. What standards did we use? Was that standard, when we talk about comparing two rounds, did you use the same standard, the same stuff to measure each?
It's tested by an independent tester that works for the company that made the ammo.
Yeah, I would hesitate to use that ammo in my firearm. I actually was happy to see the Hornady announcement, because I've been carrying Hornady Critical Defense, which is the civilian version, in my Glock 43 we talked about earlier. I've been carrying that in my Glock 43 for years. Not the same ammo.
Plug for Hornady, but that's all I carry.
Yeah, and I rely on it. When I worked for, to throw out some of the other brands, I know that one of our local sheriff's departments uses the Spear Gold Dot. Yep. That's again, when you look at reliability and you want to know what the performance characteristics of that round, I feel confident that the major manufacturers are going to produce something that is reasonably the same as what I expect it to be.
Yes.
With these off-brand stuff, I don't know. And you get into
one of these companies there's two of them now that came out with this new round where the actual bullet to projectile looks like a drill bit. I don't want to name their names, or I'll be hiring you.
Yeah. Again, I think that's I think you have a great term for it. It's gimmick ammo. Yeah. Again, prior lifetime, I did things I was a firefighter EMT before I became a law enforcement officer, and I dealt with shootings. What stops people is cavitation and wound channels. And if you have something that's designed to be like a drill bit, well, every time I've ever used a drill bit, it went in and made the same size hole that it came out. Yep. So that's not going to cause this massive wound channel that's going to stop my assailant. That's
your hollow point. Your JHP is designed, once it goes in, it comes to a complete stop in a couple inches
and transfers all the energy. It's not about just making holes in things, but it's transferring that energy, which causes cavitation and other issues. Yeah. I use the example of being punched in the stomach. If you've ever been punched in the stomach, it kind of makes you pause for a minute as you gasp and try and get all your internal organs to go back where they were.
I'll think about George Foreman or somebody punching.
Yeah, before they were displaced by a fist. Well, a bullet doesn't allow them to recover. No. But back to the over-penetration issue. We're in Florida. You're not going to have big, heavy jackets for the most part. Hell, if you're wearing a big, heavy jacket today, I'm probably calling law enforcement to see if you're mentally okay. It was like 96 degrees and high humidity. It was nasty. But we're not having to penetrate through.
That's why I work inside.
Yeah, absolutely. People always say it's the best thing since sliced bread. No, it's the best thing since air conditioning was developed for Florida.
Yes. Now, here's another question for you. Private sales. There's no registration of firearms in the state. So you can any individual can sell their firearm to any other individual as long as they do, tell me if I'm saying it wrong, their due diligence to make sure that person can legally own or possess that firearm.
To some extent, yeah, you are required. Each county in the state of Florida has the ability to set their own rules regarding private sales and background checks and waiting periods.
I know Sarasota County has that weird law where every private sale has to have a background check done.
That is correct. And that means any private sale or any part of a private sale that started or originated or went through Sarasota. Yeah. You call somebody with a Sarasota telephone number, telephone exchange, technically that would be a part that touched on Sarasota, and you'd have to do a background check before your private sale.
Now, it would be hard for them to prove that or find out what's going on. But the biggest thing that got to me is the other week it came out that our division of licensing had a little mishap, and they weren't doing background checks on people for their concealed weapons license.
Yeah, that was just a horrible thing that happened. I can't stress enough how much, again, I love background checks. I have no problem with gun ownership, and I have no problem with waiting periods. Yeah. But we have to do that. I've heard from a number of people doing private sales. Well, I checked to see if you had a concealed weapons license.
It means nothing.
Well, they're issued for 7 years. If you kill somebody or you get arrested for a felony the day after you get your concealed weapons license, it doesn't get yanked. It stays there for 7 years. You can possess it for 7 years.
And you can still renew it because they're not checking.
Yeah, and they're not checking. You can still renew it.
I bet they'll even mail to the jail if you're in jail.
That would be an interesting thing to check. But I don't want to be in jail.
No, you're in jail. But it's crazy. And I just keep trying to warn people when people get upset with this. Listen, and I'm not trying to say this, go to your local gun shop if you're going to sell a firearm privately to somebody. Say, hey, go to a local gun shop. The ATF now allows you to do this, and they can run the background check on that person for you.
Correct. If I understand the process correctly, you'd bring the firearm in. 2 people would come in. You run a background check on the purchaser. If that comes back clear and they want to complete the sale, you then check the gun in to your system as a put it in your bound book, so there's a record, and then you immediately sign it out to that person. They do the 4473, and there's even now a checkbox on the new form. The 4473 again is that federal form when you transfer a firearm. There's a checkbox that say the whole purpose of this transfer was to facilitate a private sale.
Yeah.
That keeps the gun store really out of where it came from before then and everything else. And it just gives you, if you're the owner selling the gun and later on you get that knock on the door because there was a trace.
And it has happened.
You can say, I transferred it to that person, but we used this federally licensed firearm dealer.
Yeah.
And then they'll come to that dealer and pull the record. Now they'll have everything they need to follow up on that.
CYOA.
And it covers your butt. You're out of the problem.
Yes. I think that's a smart way of doing things. A lot of people will say, hey, that's just a way for a gun shop to make money. Well, guess what? They're gun shops. They're in business to make money. That's why they're in business.
And if you like firearms and you want to have gun shops there to be able to purchase firearms, ammo, and everything else, you need to keep them in business.
Yes. So I would highly suggest if you're going to do a private sale, don't just ask for the concealed weapons license. Go somewhere. Go to a gun shop. Have them run the background. It's going to cost you. It's a nominal fee. They'll probably charge you. It could be anywhere from $5 to whatever.
Right. The state sets a fee for their background check, and the gun store is not going to do it, for free for you.
But they're their time.
Yeah, but they aren't going to gouge you, and you get peace of mind out of it.
Yes.
You're responsible for that firearm, and if you had that option and you didn't use it, there are attorneys out there who would use that to try and bring you into the lawsuit if that firearm was ultimately used illegally.
I can't talk about it, but I've known a few cases in this area where people have sold guns like that to people they could have easily found out they were felons and they couldn't have a gun.
Yes, that's happened several times that I'm aware of as well. I get calls about that. And again, he's right. I can't go into details, but there are ways to protect yourself. Using a local dealer to go in and do that private sale transfer background check is just a way to protect your family and your peace of mind, so you don't have to worry about what happens after. That you've done you've been as careful as you could be.
All right, Tim, this was a quick hour.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
They're going to turn us off in a second. Again, it was a blast, Tim. I'm going to have all your contact information on all of our social media outlets. Just go to Talking Guns with Joe. You can watch the video, this whole show, in about 5 minutes, not even. Tim, so if you want to see yourself.
I would hate to have to actually look at me.
Broadcast app. We'll have all of Tim's contact information. Listen, you're looking for a good attorney or something like that, give Tim a call. Give him a try.
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate being here.
Everybody have a great night, and we will see you next week.